"Veteran," my sister shouted in court. But when I calmly set a document on the judge's desk, he looked up and said, "Lock the doors. No one leaves this room." My dad turned his head, my mom started shaking, and my sister stood frozen. "She's just homeless," she mumbled, but the truth was about to hit them hard. I'd imagined this homecoming for over 2 decades. But I never expected the door to close the moment I stood before it. The late September air clung to my skin, cool and thick with the smell of damp leaves. I paused at the edge of the iron gate that sealed off the house I had once called home. A security camera buzzed above, tilting slightly as if recognizing me. I waited for the click of the lock, for the sound of welcome. None came. The gate didn't budge. I pressed the intercom. A sharp buzz answered, then silence. I tried again. "Claire," my voice cracked, rusty from the years. "It's me." The front door opened. Claire emerged in a tailored blazer and crisp slacks, every inch the estate's gatekeeper. She stood at the top of the stairs, her phone already at her ear. "I'm calling the police," she said, eyes narrowing as if I were a stranger. "There's someone trying to enter the property. Claims to be family." The shock punched the air from my lungs. "Claire, what are you doing?" "This isn't your home anymore," she snapped. "You've been gone for decades, Naomi. Don't show up here dressed like that expecting something." I tightened my grip on the duffel bag. I just got discharged. I thought. "God, I thought I'd see Mom, maybe Dad." She scoffed. "You should have thought of them before disappearing for 25 years. We moved on. You're not in the will. You're not even on the deed." The words hit harder than any combat report I'd ever filed. "I grew up in this house," I said, voice low. "That tree," I pointed to the sycamore that still scraped against the attic window. "I broke my arm climbing it. I bled into the carpet you probably replaced." Claire's jaw clenched. "You always made everything about you. You think a uniform earns you the right to just show up and expect a hero's welcome." The police cruiser turned onto the street with an agonizing slowness. Blue lights flashing, but siren off. My gut twisted. 2 officers stepped out. One older, one barely out of academy age. The older one froze slightly when he saw me. "Naomi Green?" he asked. "Ma'am, you just got out." "Pentagon certified, Lieutenant Colonel, Cyber Command." I swallowed. "This is my parents' house." The young officer glanced at Claire, who folded her arms triumphantly. "This property belongs to Claire Green and Harold Green. There's no legal record of Naomi Green holding ownership or rights of residence." My mouth opened, then closed. "Wait, Harold Green, my father." I blinked hard. "He's still here." Claire's face remained carved from stone. "He moved in after selling the house we grew up in. This was Grandpa's. I renovated it legally." "I don't care about legal," I whispered. "I care that it was home." The officer cleared his throat. "Ma'am, unless you have identification proving this is your residence, we're going to have to ask you to leave the premises." My hands trembled as I fumbled for my discharge papers. But even I knew they didn't matter here. I took a step back, then another, until my boots met the edge of the sidewalk. I didn't cry when they took my medals. I didn't cry when I coded in a hospital tent in Bahrain. But I cried now because a place that shaped me refused to recognize me. My phone buzzed. I grabbed it with numb fingers. A message from "Ma'am." No name, just "You should return to base. There's nothing here for you." I let the phone drop. Through the fog of my tears, I looked up, past the window where a figure sat in the living room. My father. He didn't move, didn't wave, didn't even glance at me. I looked through the window, a silhouette of my father seated inside, unmoving, refusing to look at me even once. I slept in my car that night, staring at the dark outline of the home that should have been mine. By morning, a "for sale" sign was already posted on the lawn. I didn't sleep much. My eyes refused to close. Every creak of the wind, every flicker of the porch light, every memory that clung to the silhouette of that house, it kept me locked in place. Heart pounding with a rhythm I hadn't felt since my early deployments. That was supposed to be my safe place, my inheritance, my anchor. Now it was a battleground. The web of deceit I pulled into a small cafe the next morning, bleary-eyed and bone-tired. Ruth Green was already there, pressed slacks, dark blazer, a sharp contrast to my faded uniform and the exhaustion etched into my face. We hadn't seen each other since undergrad, but she looked at me like no time had passed. That alone almost made me cry. "I saw the listing this morning," she said without greeting, flipping her tablet toward me. There it was, my home, listed under Raven Holdings LLC. I stared at the screen. Raven Holdings? She nodded grimly. And here's the kicker. 3 months ago, there was a property transfer recorded here. She passed over a printout. My name was on the seller line. Except that wasn't my signature. That's forged, I said flatly. A cold pressure building behind my eyes. I've never signed anything related to selling that house. I figured. Ruth pulled up another document. This one from a local notary, witnessed and stamped by a guy who was under review last year for falsifying DMV affidavits. I'll subpoena him. I shook my head in disbelief. So they sold their house and now they're laundering through mine? Her brows arched. What? I took a breath. 3 months ago, they moved out of their house. Said it was time for a fresh start. They showed up here. Claire said it made more sense to consolidate family assets. My parents, Mom, especially made a big deal about how sentimental the old house was, but I didn't think they meant this house. Ruth nodded slowly. They probably used Raven Holdings as a buffer to avoid legal exposure. Whoever's behind that company, I bet your sister's husband is involved. My stomach turned. Brian? Ruth looked grim. He works in international logistics, doesn't he? Yes. And they're storing supplies in the basement. I blinked. What? She pointed to a note in her file. City utilities show a spike in energy consumption at the property, like something's being refrigerated, but no permit for renovation or commercial usage has been filed. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. An email from my mother. I didn't want to read it, but I did. Naomi, this is not betrayal. It's practicality. You never lived here. We did. And you're never around. Love, Mom. It hit harder than I expected. Like she was justifying theft with maternal indifference. I need access to that house, I murmured. Not just to take it back. I want to know what's inside. Ruth hesitated. That could be dangerous, Naomi. If they're using the house for something illegal. I'm not walking away. She nodded once. Then we'll start with a forensic document analyst. I'll file for an injunction to freeze the title. And, Naomi? What? You'll need to be careful. People who forge deeds and commit fraud aren't afraid to cross legal lines. The rest of the day passed in intense calls and quiet meetings. I returned to my car late that evening, unsure whether I was more angry or numb. I parked down the block, determined to stay close to watch. The air was still warm, sticky, like Virginia hadn't accepted fall yet. I noticed the man standing across the street just after 1:45 a.m. He didn't look at me, but he lingered near the corner lamppost. When he left, I thought nothing of it until I saw the slip of paper wedged under my windshield wiper. It wasn't folded, just pressed flat like a warning or a test. If you're the real Naomi, meet me at Alley 7, 11 p.m. Come alone. I stared down the block at the winding path that led behind the old bakery. I had 10 minutes. I didn't hesitate. The midnight confession, the man's voice was low, sharp with urgency. His name was Ethan, mid-40s, weathered face, former Marine turned mechanic. We stood in the shadow of an old street lamp at the edge of the alley behind the property. A chain-link fence separated us from the warehouse-turned-storage shed behind what was once my grandfather's home. They say you're dangerous, Naomi, he muttered. But if you ask me, dangerous is what's going on in that building. My fingers curled around the edge of my jacket where the small recording device sat in the inner pocket. I scanned the alley. No security cameras, no eyes, but too quiet. What do you mean? I asked. I've seen men unloading crates from black vans. License plates vanish before they pull up. They don't stay long. Your sister's husband. He's there every week, always with gloves on. Never a word to the neighbors. I remembered the last thing Brian ever said to me, the day of my grandfather's funeral. You should stick to places with guns, Lieutenant. This isn't your terrain anymore. That smug tone, the contempt. Maybe he was right, but I knew how to watch, how to wait. That night, I returned to the alley alone, dressed in black, camera clipped to my collar, recorder live. I crouched behind the half-burnt fence near the back lot. Midnight came with a low rumble of engines. 2 black trucks rolled in without headlights. I held my breath. 4 men stepped out, 2 I didn't recognize, 1 clearly armed. The other wore a cap pulled low and carried a clipboard. Then came Brian. His gait was confident, relaxed, like this was just another Tuesday night. He didn't speak much, just pointed toward the rear door of the house. The group moved with practiced ease. Boxes unloaded, hands gloved, everything efficient. Ruth was right. This wasn't just squatting. This was organized. Then something unexpected. Brian stepped inside the old warehouse. I crept closer, careful not to trigger the loose gravel underfoot. I positioned the small audio recorder near a cracked vent, its mic angled toward the loading area from inside. Voices filtered through, muffled for clarity, but then one cut through sharper than the rest. If that officer girl finds out, sever the tie. No warning. I froze. The voice was familiar, gravelly, deliberate. My father. My throat tightened. I replayed it in my head just to be sure. That deep Virginia accent, that phrasing. I hadn't heard him speak directly to me in years. And now I heard him planning my erasure. I withdrew slowly, slipping behind the fence, hands shaking. I clutched the recording device like it might burn through my palm. Back in my car, I played the audio again, scrubbed it carefully, listening for every syllable. The voices were vague, except his. That one line. It played over and over in my head. I didn't sleep. At sunrise, I circled the block again and returned to the alley. But when I reached the vent, my recorder was gone. Someone had been there. Someone new. Panic flooded my gut, thick and metallic. My cover was slipping. I needed to move fast before the window slammed shut. I drove to a nearby diner to regroup, heart hammering. I wasn't even halfway through my coffee when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. The message read, "You're playing with fire. I have your military psych report. Want to see what it says about you?" The confrontation the wind picked up before he did. He stood next to his navy blue sedan, crisp jacket zipped all the way to the collar, hat pulled low as if shielding himself from recognition. But it wasn't the rain he feared. It was me. I recognized the distance in his eyes, the stiffness in his posture. He'd practiced this meeting, prepared for it like a business transaction. Cold, clean, efficient. I stopped 2 steps away. "Why are you doing this?" He didn't flinch. "You came back different. I served this country for 25 years. And in those 25 years, you became someone I don't recognize." The sentence hit like a rifle shot. I had imagined this moment in 1,000 different ways. Him saying he was proud, even quietly acknowledging the work I'd done. I had never imagined indifference. "I want the truth about the house," I said, voice low but sharp. "You knew what Grandpa left me. You witnessed the signing." He shifted his weight. "That document was outdated. Circumstances changed. Enough to forge my name? Enough to hide it under a shell company." I stepped closer. "I have audio." That got him. His jaw tensed, eyes narrowing, but still he wouldn't look directly at me. "I heard your voice. You said if I found out, you'd cut the tie." He finally turned toward me, then, his eyes colder than I remembered. "I meant what I said. We've tried to protect the family name. Your return jeopardizes everything we've built. Your sister is part of a respected enterprise. You live in a car because you sold my home." He didn't answer. Just glanced toward the black SUV parked across the lot. "I'm not ashamed of what I've done," I said. "But you're of me. That's what this is really about." He stepped back, adjusting his cuffs like brushing off dirt. "You're not one of us anymore." The words didn't echo. They landed and stayed. He turned, walked to the SUV, and the driver stepped out to open the door. I recognized the man immediately, the same one who'd helped unload boxes at the warehouse. Bald head, silver watch, always silent. They drove off without another word. I stood alone in the rain. It started as a drizzle, then turned heavier, soaking through my sleeves, my collar, my soul. There was no reconciliation waiting in the story, just truth. And that was colder than anything I'd faced in uniform. I walked back to my car, chest tight, throat burning with every breath. A silent argument I couldn't win. I didn't cry, but I did find an envelope wedged beneath my windshield wiper. It wasn't official, just a plain manila sleeve sealed with tape. I got in, turned on the cabin light, and opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a photocopy of my grandfather's original will. My name, the property address, all unaltered. The signature dates matched the copy I had stored in an encrypted archive from years ago. No transfer clause, no sale condition. It was airtight. A handwritten note was stapled to the top. "I notarized this document that day. I know they falsified it later. Ms." I stared at it, heart pounding. Proof. the first crack in their narrative. I scanned it again, then snapped a picture and texted it to Ruth with a single line. This changes everything. The digital footprint. I sat in the corner of my temporary rental, bare mattress, one chair, no curtains, lit only by the blue light of my laptop. Outside, the night wind rattled loose siding. Inside, my stomach churned as I stared at the report Isaac just sent over. I had reached out hours earlier, forwarding the original deed and the scandal along with the corporate trail Ruth had begun unearthing. He'd responded almost instantly. I remember Raven Holdings, he wrote. We flagged them as a front company during a 2012 counterintel probe laundering false, contracting dark money, but we were told to stand down. Case was sealed. Now, the name Brian Green was staring back at me, listed under Consultant Logistics in the appendix of that same file. I froze. Claire had always insisted Brian saved the family from collapse. He rebuilt Dad's business. Without him, we'd have lost everything. No wonder she protected him so fiercely. But rebuild with what? Dirty money. I opened the next PDF from Ruth. Transaction records tied to the shell companies leasing the warehouse. She'd traced them to 3 entities, each registered in Nevada under different names, but the money flowed to one destination, Claire's private account. Over $500,000 transferred in the past 18 months. I clenched my jaw and pulled up the leasing contract. Found the name of the property manager. I didn't need to read past the first line. My father's signature, bold and slanted, was right there. Land use supervisor. He had signed off on it. So, they were all in it. All 3 of them. I ran a background index on Raven Holdings through the private intel portal Isaac still had access to. The tags were damning. Classified contractor cover. Suspected financial funnel. Domestic asset misappropriation. Isaac pinged again. You sure you're ready for this? If you move, they'll hit back. I replied without hesitation. I'm not backing off. I'm not just fighting for a house. I'm fighting to expose what they've done and who they're still hurting. I called Ruth. She picked up immediately. I have the contractor names, the bank routing, the signed lease. Everything links and the forgery matches. My signature was copied from a tax return in 2017, notarized by a woman who hasn't been licensed since 2020. I already verified. Ruth was silent a moment. Then we file. Fraud, criminal conspiracy, real estate title tampering, possibly federal racketeering. If the Raven Holdings connection holds, it holds. For the first time since I'd returned, I felt grounded, not angry, not broken, focused. They erased me, I said. But now I found them on paper, in crime files, in signatures they forgot to hide. My inbox chimed. A leak. Subject, urgent. She's investigating. It was an internal email sent between 2 Raven Holdings addresses. Someone had forwarded it anonymously. She started connecting the dots. Clean house before the 16th lock down the CLA accounts. The Green girls are persistent. I read it twice. They knew. They were already trying to erase the trail again. The injunction. I stood at the gate again, this time in uniform, decorated with honors. But beside me was someone more powerful than medals, my lawyer. Ruth adjusted the strap of her leather case as we waited at the counter inside Fairfax Town Hall. Sunlight poured through the high windows, but the tension between us and the property office clerk was thick as cement. The clerk tapped her keyboard, eyes darting across the screen. This deed is active, she said, almost too casually. Ruth didn't flinch. That's precisely why we're here. We're filing a petition for immediate injunction on all transfers based on compelling evidence of forgery and fraud. I slid forward the folder Ruth had prepared, detailed analysis of the signature inconsistencies, the timeline of the false notary, and the suspicious account trails. At the top of the stacks was the verified original deed from my grandfather's will. The woman's eyes widened. She looked at Ruth, then at me. Lieutenant Colonel Green, I said softly. Retired. I grew up in that house. By noon, we had a stamped confirmation. The land office had enacted a temporary hold on all transactions related to the property pending further investigation. It wasn't everything, but it was a start, a line in the sand. The drive to the house felt surreal. This time, we didn't park across the street or lurk in shadows. We pulled straight into the driveway. Claire's Lexus was already there. Brian's truck too. Ruth adjusted her jacket, pulled out the official envelope with the injunction, and handed it to me. Let's give it to her together. I rang the bell. Claire answered, her lips already curled into that polished, performative smile until she saw my uniform. Then she saw Ruth. The color drained from her face. We're here to serve you with a court injunction, Ruth said crisply, handing over the envelope. Effective immediately, any transfer, lease, or modification of the property is suspended. You've been notified. Claire's hands trembled as she took the papers. What is this? Some kind of joke, she hissed. Brian appeared behind her, slow and deliberate. You really want to go this route, Naomi? He said, voice like gravel soaked in oil. You don't know who you're fighting. I met his gaze, calm, controlled. I used to work internal investigations at the Pentagon, I said. I've seen men like you. Watch them bluff, threaten, then fold. His eyes narrowed. For a flicker, just a breath, I saw it. Fear. Not of me, maybe, but of something unraveling. Claire sputtered. You can't do this. You're not even the rightful owner. Ruth cut in. That's what we intend to prove in court. Brian stepped forward. This is harassment. You're harassing my family. Ruth gave him a hard look. And fraud is a felony. We turned and left. The slam of the door behind us was louder than I expected, like a final act in a play that had gone on too long. In the car, Ruth glanced over at me. They'll hit back, Naomi. You ready? The evidence mounts what they didn't know? I had access to tools they couldn't imagine. Digital forensics, chain of custody, metadata, and a few friends who owed me favors. The soft hum of my laptop filled the silent apartment as I leaned over a second monitor. Eyes tracing digital breadcrumbs left behind by people who thought they were smarter than the system. The glow of the screen lit the stacks of documents on my kitchen counter, overlapping in an organized chaos only I could decipher. It was nearing midnight. I hadn't slept properly in days, but sleep didn't matter. Not when I was this close. I clicked into the secure Zoom room. Isaac appeared first. Tired eyes, Marine Corps cap still on despite the hour. Then Kayla popped in. She'd always preferred anonymity, a blurred background, and her voice modulated just enough to avoid AI tracing. I got your packet, Kayla said without preamble. Encrypted. Well, but let's see what the liars left behind. I uploaded a zip file of PDF screenshots and one particularly shady wire transfer receipt. Kayla whistled. Someone's been busy laundering money. Follow the IP. I said, that's all I need. She started parsing headers, running scripts, fingers tapping like a symphony of exposure. Meanwhile, Isaac leaned closer to the camera. I ran that company name you sent, Mari Tech Solutions. You're not going to like this. He uploaded a redacted report from a Defense Department internal archive. Back in 2016, Maritech bid on a supply contract, camo gear, and radio parts. They submitted forged compliance reports. Case sealed when someone upstairs pulled strings. Let me guess, I said flatly. No conviction, no penalty. Correct. But guess whose name shows up on the board of directors? Brian Green. I stared at the name. All this time, Claire said he was the one who kept the family stable. She never said how. Kayla interrupted. I isolated a digital signature from that financial transfer you sent. The VPN they used isn't clean. Most amateurs assume they're safe, but there's a DNS leak. That IP traces back to a residential modem, Fairfax area, registered to Claire Green. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. So, they're funneling money from the house. Exactly. And get this, Kayla added, one of the purchase orders routed through Maritech's system matches a lot number tied to a surveillance drone batch we flagged years ago during your deployment. You were still in the Gulf then, right? My mind flashed back. That case never resolved. Half the gear vanished after audit. Someone covered it. Now, it felt like the ghosts of my past were reaching through the timeline, converging right here, right now. I want a chain of evidence, I said. Every login, every IP, every transaction they touched. This isn't just fraud. It's military misappropriation. Isaac nodded. I'll pull DoD procurement cross-references. This could trigger federal review if it hits the right ears. Kayla's screen flickered. Her face sharpened with tension. Naomi, she said carefully. Your inbox was accessed at 8:42 p.m. from an unfamiliar device. I froze. Are you saying I've been hacked? I'm saying someone's trying to cover their tracks and you just lit up their radar. The final strike, the letter came in a plain envelope. A cease and desist. But I had already mailed my report to the office of the Inspector General. It was thin, too thin to contain the weight of the guilt they carried, but it screamed desperation. The envelope sat on my kitchen table next to a steaming mug of black coffee. Its neatly typed return address, sterile and smug, Raven Holdings, Legal Affairs. I didn't even bother opening it. Instead, I turned back to the envelope I had dropped off yesterday morning, priority mail, certified, signed upon delivery. Inside were copies of bank transfers, falsified deeds, metadata chains, audio transcripts, and a sworn affidavit detailing how my identity had been used to secure access to restricted contracts. Each page was numbered, watermarked, and bound together by the one thing none of them had counted on, a soldier who knew how to build a case from the ground up. The Office of the Inspector General for the Department of Defense didn't move quickly, but when it moved, it thundered. Later that evening, I received the automated reply. Your report has been received and assigned a preliminary review officer. Follow-up will be communicated via a secure channel. I read the line 3 times, letting it settle into the marrow of my bones. No longer whispers and shadows. No longer secrets between family members. This was now federal. Ruth called as I finished scanning the reply. They'll want a full comparison of Claire's known income versus incoming wires. Can you get that from Kayla? I already asked her, I said. She's pulling last year's IRS statements and cross-referencing them with flagged transfers from shell companies. We'll need a subpoena eventually. Let me worry about that, Ruth replied. Just make sure nothing happens to you in the meantime. I smiled grimly. They'd have to try harder than an envelope. But elsewhere, someone was unraveling. I didn't hear it firsthand, but I later found out from Ruth, who heard it from a courthouse clerk who had lunch with someone at the zoning office. Claire had lost it. Apparently, she found out about the federal submission within hours. Whether it was the bank's compliance alert or a panicked call from Brian, she knew I'd gone over their heads, and she didn't take it well. By noon, Claire had shown up at Ruth's office unannounced, uninvited, and unhinged. You think this is going to help her? She'd hissed. She's going to drag us all down, including her own father. Ruth remained calm, professional. She handed her a copy of the cease and desist letter I had received and said quietly, "You might want to advise your counsel that intimidation of a federal whistleblower is a felony." Claire stormed out, but not before throwing one final threat over her shoulder. This isn't over. No, I thought, sitting in my apartment, watching the rain beat against the window. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. That night, Ruth came over with 2 folders, bank summaries from Claire and Brian. The figures were staggering. Claire's declared salary as a nonprofit coordinator didn't come close to matching the deposits, and Brian. There were 3 transfers from a shell account linked to Mari Tech Solutions, all deposited the same week the forged deed was processed. I stared at the numbers, shaking my head. They moved fast, I said. They had a timeline. This wasn't desperation. It was coordinated. They underestimated you, Ruth said. I looked at her, calm but resolute. They always have. The phone buzzed. A voicemail from an unknown number. I played it on speaker. It was Claire. Her voice shaky, uneven. Naomi, please. Let's meet. Just talk. This doesn't have to go further. We're still family. I ended the message before it finished. I'm not here to talk, I told Ruth. I'm here to shut them down. The verdict: Claire deleted me from the family tree. I added her name to a federal inquiry. The elevator hummed as it climbed toward the 7th floor of the U.S. Attorney's Office in Arlington. I stood beside Ruth, my reflection barely recognizable in the brushed metal doors. Not because of my clothes, I was still in a muted blazer and slacks, but because of what I was carrying inside. For once, it wasn't a uniform or a badge. It was knowledge, leverage, evidence. We were led to a glass-walled conference room by a stone-faced paralegal. Inside, the federal prosecutor was already waiting, Matthew Cruz, Assistant U.S. Attorney for Northern Virginia. His handshake was firm, but not performative. His eyes didn't flinch when Ruth set down the bulging folder of documents. Miss Green, he began, thank you for coming. We've reviewed the materials submitted to the Office of the Inspector General. We believe a formal criminal inquiry is warranted. Hearing it aloud gave the whole thing new weight. The forged deeds, The bank transfers, the surveillance footage, and most damning of all, the fraudulent contracts tied to Raven Holdings and Mari Tech, both traced back to Claire and Brian. I spoke carefully, controlling my breathing like I had in hundreds of interrogations before. They used my discharge credentials to gain access to federal bidding processes. They used my grandfather's house as a discreet waypoint. They never imagined someone would come back to check. Ruth added, "We also have preliminary confirmation that Mr. Green, Naomi's father, served as a proxy on property transfers to mask a conflict of interest that may qualify as conspiracy to defraud." Cruz opened a leather binder. "Based on what we've received, we're issuing federal subpoenas for Brian Green, Claire Green, and Harold Green. They will be compelled to testify in a closed preliminary hearing 2 weeks from today." I leaned forward. "I want to be anonymous until then. No public disclosures, no leaks to media or local authorities. They've already tried to intimidate me." "We'll flag your testimony under protective status," Cruz said, "but be advised, once formal charges are filed, anonymity isn't guaranteed." "That's fine," I said. By then, I want to be the one speaking out loud. Outside the window, I could see the Potomac, placid and gray. The calm before the current shifted. That afternoon, I waited with Ruth in the lobby of Claire's nonprofit foundation. The subpoena was to be delivered in person. She didn't know we were watching from across the atrium. Claire walked in, brisk heels and a too-bright smile for the receptionist. It took less than a minute. A U.S. Marshal stepped forward, handed her the envelope, and spoke the words we'd waited weeks to hear. "You are being summoned under federal subpoena for alleged participation in conspiracy and fraud." The receptionist gasped. Phones froze in mid-scroll. Claire's smile shattered. Her hand trembled as she took the envelope. She turned, eyes scanning the lobby. And for a moment, I thought she saw me, but she didn't. I was behind mirrored glass, watching the empire she built on silence begin to crumble. Later that night, Ruth and I stepped out of the federal building after finalizing the paperwork. The air smelled like the first hint of spring, wet concrete, pollen, tension. "I've rarely seen a case turn this fast," Ruth murmured. "They know they're exposed." "Good," I said. "They should be afraid." As we reached the parking garage, I slowed. A black sedan sat idling across the street. Windows tinted, engine running. No license plate visible from this angle. Just long enough to be watching. Just long enough to make sure I noticed. The courtroom showdown. The courtroom was two cold white lights overhead, pale walls, steel benches that hummed when I shifted. I stood behind the witness table, right hand raised, the oath catching in my throat like sandpaper. I didn't shake, but I remembered the day my grandfather handed me the keys to the house. The day I came home to find my name erased. The night I heard my father's voice masked in shadows, plotting behind my back. Now I stood here not as the daughter who had been disowned, but as a decorated officer, a cybersecurity analyst with clearance history, and most importantly, a plaintiff backed by federal prosecution. The prosecutor began. "Miss Green, please describe what was done to your property." I met his eyes, then shifted toward the bench. "They forged my signature on a deed transferring ancestral property. They altered bank records, funneled money through offshore accounts disguised as nonprofit funds, and they used my military discharge credentials to apply for federal contracts they had no legal access to." He nodded. "Did you consent to any of this, Ms. Green?" The evidence came in waves. A photograph of the deed with the falsified signature. A screen capture of the IP logs Kayla had tracked to Claire's home network. Audio files with my father's voice, subdued but distinct, arranging late-night deliveries to the warehouse behind my house. And then came the financial documents, bank transfers from Raven Holdings to shell corporations in Claire's name. Another to Brian's Mari Tech Solutions, amounts too large for helping the family. Claire sat stone still, face pale beneath her mascara. Brian leaned forward, jaw clenched, whispering urgently to his lawyer. My father didn't even blink. The defense tried. Brian's attorney objected to the admissibility of surveillance footage not obtained through legal means. Ruth stepped in with a declaration signed by our digital expert, data chain of custody. Intact, no tampering, time-stamped. Claire's lawyer tried to spin the narrative. My client acted under the impression that Naomi had relinquished claim to the house. This was a familial misunderstanding. I leaned into the microphone. A misunderstanding doesn't involve stolen credentials, falsified signatures, and use of federal infrastructure for illegal bidding. The final nail came when the prosecutor held up a physical copy of the procurement contract, complete with my old clearance codes and Brian's name on the submission. He looked like he might bolt. Then the prosecutor turned to my father. Mr. Green, can you explain the source of the $320,000 you transferred to Maritech? Silence. He looked toward the floor, then toward Claire, then finally toward me. But I wasn't his daughter now. I was a federal witness with everything to lose and nothing left to protect. The prosecutor's voice was calm. In your opinion, Ms. Green, does this constitute a deliberate conspiracy? Yes, I said. It wasn't just about a house. It was about power, control, and silencing someone they thought wouldn't come back. He nodded once, then turned to the judge. In closing, Your Honor, the defendants did not simply defraud a veteran. They undermined the integrity of public trust, used federal systems for personal gain, and orchestrated a coordinated attempt to erase accountability. These are not family disputes. These are federal crimes. The courtroom exhaled. Somewhere behind me, pens scribbled on notepads. Reporters finally allowed to witness the case. I could hear the clatter of keys, smell the ink from the printed exhibits. I felt every eye turned toward me as the judge recessed the hearing. I stood slowly, stepped down from the platform, and gathered my things. My palms were sweating. I told myself it was adrenaline, not grief. Outside, I moved through the crowd of photographers and questions, ignoring the flashes. Ruth stayed close. She didn't speak. Neither did I. Not until I reached the edge of the sidewalk and saw her. My mother, standing under a tree, hands clasped together like in prayer. Her mouth trembled, but no words came. Her eyes were red. She hadn't said a thing in years. Not one letter, not one call. But now she was here, and I, who had faced war zones and courts alike, found my hand trembling. The reckoning he begged me outside the courtroom. Please, Naomi, don't ruin us. I looked him in the eyes and said, you did that on your own. It was late afternoon, the light stretching long shadows across the courthouse steps. I just finished reviewing the final briefing with Ruth when I saw him standing near the marble column by the hallway, not in a suit, but in his old wool coat. His tie was crooked. His face was pale. He looked smaller than I remembered. I didn't slow my steps until I was nearly past him, but then he spoke, low and hoarse. Naomi. I turned. Mr. Green, I said flatly. His face crumpled at the title. Don't do that. I'm your father. You lost the right to that word the day you erased me from everything, I said. He stepped closer. I didn't know it would go this far. You didn't care, I corrected. That's what you mean. I made mistakes, he said, hands open, pleading. We were trying to protect the family by forging documents, stealing my house, laundering money through a company that used my clearance. That's protection. He looked away. Jaw tight. I was scared. No, you were proud, I said. You couldn't stand that your daughter came back in uniform instead of a dress, holding medals instead of wedding invitations. His eyes flickered. That's not fair. No, I said quietly. What wasn't fair was you not coming to my retirement ceremony. Remember that? When I called and invited you, he stayed silent. You said, and I quote, that's not something to brag about. It's just a job. 25 years of service, and you reduced it to nothing. He swallowed hard. Claire was going through a rough time then. Claire was always going through something, I said. And you always had time for her, for Brian, but never for me. He didn't argue. Instead, he lowered his voice. You've already humiliated us. The indictments, the hearings, the news coverage. Please, Naomi, don't let it go further. I laughed, short and sharp. You think. This is about humiliation. It'll destroy our name, he whispered. Our name? I echoed. You erased my name from the will, from the family records, from everything. I panicked, he said. I let Claire talk me into things. You signed? You knew. He didn't answer. After a moment, he reached out his hand, trembling as it hovered near mine. I know I failed, but I'm still your father. I stared at that hand. For a second, I saw the man who once held mine on the walk to school, who once helped fix my bike chain. But then I remembered the empty seat at my officer commissioning. The silence after my deployments, the house I came home to only to be thrown out like a stranger. I didn't take his hand. Behind him, I saw her, my mother, standing near the edge of the colonnade. She hadn't approached, but she watched. Her arms were folded tight across her chest, her eyes rimmed red. "I don't hate you," I told him. "But I can't forgive you on behalf of justice." He flinched. "And justice," I said, "is coming whether you ask for mercy or not." He turned away then, shoulders hunched. I walked past him without looking back. As I reached the bottom of the steps, I felt someone beside me. My mother. She didn't meet my eyes, but her voice broke the silence. If I had made different choices, maybe it wouldn't hurt this much. I looked at her for a long second, then kept walking. My mother stepped closer and whispered, if I had chosen differently, maybe it wouldn't hurt this much. They took everything, but I walked out that courtroom with my name, my honor, and justice on my side. The courtroom was quieter than I expected. For all the weeks of hearings, motions, and cross-examinations, today felt still, final. There was no shouting, no dramatics, just the gavel, the judge's even tone, and the weight of consequences being carved into history. I sat beside Ruth, our shoulders barely touching. Across the aisle were Claire, Brian, and my father, lined up in a row like defendants in a photo I never imagined I'd see. Claire's face was pale, jaw locked. Brian's eyes flicked around nervously. My father looked old, not from age, but from erosion. The slow crumbling of arrogance under truth. The judge's voice echoed, Claire Green, 6 years in federal custody. Brian Green, 8 years. Harold Green, 10 years with no parole. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the courtroom. Then silence again. No cheers, no applause. I didn't smile. I just nodded once to Ruth, who closed her folder and placed a hand gently over mine. It wasn't victory I felt. It was completion. Outside, the press swarmed, but the first people I saw were the veterans, men and women in faded uniforms, some leaning on canes or wheelchairs, others with ribbons pinned proudly to worn jackets. One of them, a man with a prosthetic leg and soft, steady eyes, stepped forward and extended his hand. "Colonel Green," he said. I shook it. "We're not forgotten," I told him. He nodded. "Not while people like you are still standing." Flashes from the cameras lit up my peripheral vision. A reporter shouted, "Do you hate them now?" After all this, I looked toward the sky for a moment. The sun had broken through the morning fog. Warmth touched my face. "I don't carry hate," I said. "I carry clarity." I walked down the steps slowly. Ruth beside me. Isaac was waiting by the car and Kayla sent a thumbs up from across the lot. They were more than allies. They were the family I chose. I didn't return to the house. I didn't need it anymore. What I wanted was never brick and wood. It was the right to belong to my own story. Weeks later, I stood inside the Defense Service Library, staring at the wall of dedication. It was made of dark granite, etched with names of those who had contributed to national security in extraordinary ways. I had walked past it once as a young cadet, whispering promises under my breath. Back then, it felt like a monument for others, untouchable. But now there it was, Colonel Naomi Green, Cyber Command, OA, 2020 to 2023. Valor, service, integrity. No family portrait ever meant as much. No inheritance ever compared. As I stood there, my reflection blurry in the polished stone, I felt tears sting my eyes, but I didn't cry. I stood tall. A new purpose in the Defense Service Library. My name was etched onto the wall of dedication. I stood before it, eyes misted, but calm. They stripped her of her name, her home, and her dignity, believing no one would ever believe a so-called broken soldier. But in the end, it was their lies that unraveled under oath and her truth that stood unshaken. Justice doesn't arrive in noise or vengeance. It arrives in the quiet courage of someone who refuses to stay erased. When injustice is met with unwavering courage, the final verdict can echo through a lifetime. Some battles are fought in silence, in courtrooms, and in the hearts of those who have been betrayed. And sometimes the quietest warrior is the one who wins the loudest. If this story resonated with you, type 1 in the comments below. If you feel it could have ended differently, type 2. Like, share, and comment your thoughts.